I've seen a lot of terrible things in my life. War, poverty, people hurting each other over a few dollars. But nothing prepared me for what I saw that morning. Behind the Millfield Market, a Doberman puppy, no more than 3 months old, was chained to a rusted concrete post in a damp corner, where dirty water from the fish stalls dripped down like diluted blood. Above him, a wet sheet of plastic fluttered in the drizzle, marked in thick, uneven black letters, "Diseased. Do not touch." The wind lifted the plastic, slapping it gently against his forehead like a verdict. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, he just bowed his head, trembling his eyes open even as flies crawled across them. I froze, my chest tightened until it hurt. They called him diseased, but when I looked into those eyes, I knew he wasn't sick. He'd just been hurt by people. I don't know what you listening to this might think, but if there's ever been a moment in your life when your heart wanted to turn away, while your conscience made you stay, this was mine. Don't leave this video. See what we humans did to a creature who only knew how to bow its head and beg to live. My name is Walter Jameson, 58 years old. I clean this market every morning while the mist still clings to the tin roofs. Millfield isn't a bad place. It's just a place where people find it easier to look away than to kneel down. That morning, a light drizzle fell. The glow from the coffee shop reflected off the puddles like liquid silver. I was dragging a heavy trash bag when I heard a faint sound, thin as breath, caught in a throat. I stopped. At first, I thought it was just water running through a drain. But then it came again, broken, weak, hoarse, like someone calling out from despair. I followed the sound. In the back corner between 2 cracked plastic bins was a tiny body, black and tan, curling into itself, trying to disappear. Its skin was cracked, and oozing yellow fluid soaked through, crawling with fleas like moving black specks. Its eyes were wide, not to see, but as if it was too afraid to close them. A small tray sat in front of it, filled with what used to be food-moldy hamburger buns, soft chicken bones, and a strip of plastic the puppy was licking, trying to find a drop of water. Then I saw the nylon collar cutting deep into its neck, leaving a dark red groove. A man stepped out of the nearby bar. Baxter, the pawn shop owner. He yawned, smirked, and said, "Don't touch it. It's sick. I tied it there to keep the rats away." I asked quietly, "By starving it?" He shrugged, lifted his beer. "Leave it. It'll die in a few days. I'll clean up. Saves me trouble." I didn't reply, but in my head a voice whispered cold as steel, "People always have a reason for their cruelty." I bent down. When my hand touched the chain, the puppy flinched, bowing even lower, as if afraid its own breath might bother me. But then something that shook me to my core, it lifted its head and gave the smallest, slowest nod. Not from fear, not from submission, but as if saying goodbye to anyone still capable of mercy. I couldn't breathe. That little bow, so simple, so small, cut straight through me. It was as if it said, "I know you won't save me, but I still want to believe just one last time." My voice shook when I whispered, "No one's ever going to call you diseased again, kid." I tore the paper from the post, crushed it in my hand, rain mixing with my tears. And right then, I knew I had just broken one of Millfield's unspoken rules. Here, people don't get involved. But that morning, I did. If you've ever walked past a creature like that, starving, labeled, thrown away, and still knelt down, still reached out, even when your hands trembled, then you understand me. You understand that sometimes compassion doesn't need applause. It just needs one person who refuses to look away. And if you're still here listening, don't leave yet. Because this story isn't just about a dog. It's about how one small life reminded me what it means to be human again. Fan 2. After I tore the "Do Not Touch" sign from the post, the drizzle kept falling on my hair and shoulders. I looked down and saw him still bowing, his whole body trembling like a wire stretched too tight. Part of me wanted to walk away, tell myself this wasn't my business. But something deep in my chest whispered, "If not you, then who?" I turned back, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in nearly a year. "Grace," I said, my voice rough. "Yes, Walter. What's going on? I think you should come down to the market. There's a creature who needs you. Grace Mitchell, Millfield's only veterinarian. She'd served in the military in Iraq before coming home to open a small clinic at the end of Pine Avenue. I first met her when I buried my wife's cat. Since then, we'd stayed in touch, but only when there was a reason, not out of habit. 15 minutes later, her silver pickup slid into the parking lot. The door opened, and she stepped out in a gray raincoat, her hair tied up, eyes sharp but kind. She stopped when she saw the dog. "Oh, God." She breathed almost like a prayer. I nodded. "He's been here at least 3 days. I saw mold under the food tray." Grace crouched down, brushed the mud from his neck, and tilted her head to examine the wounds. The collar's been cutting in for a while, probably a plastic zip tie. Hair loss from sarcoptic mange plus infection. And this, she pointed to the edge of his mouth, chemical burns. Someone tried to silence him with something spicy or acidic. I clenched my fists. Who could do that to a puppy? Grace's voice softened. People who want control but can't face resistance. She opened her medical bag, pulling out scissors and antiseptic. "Hold him steady, Walter." I knelt, my hand brushing the cold, rusted chain. He shrank back, eyes wide, heart pounding so fast I could feel it through his soaked skin. "It's okay, kid," I whispered. "I'm here now." Then I cut the chain. A faint clang echoed as the last link hit the ground. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He just stepped halfway out of the shadow, then stopped, lifting his head to look at me. That gaze, it wasn't fear. It was a cautious belief, as if asking, will they keep their word this time? Grace sighed, her eyes glistening. "We're taking him to the clinic. Now." Grace's little clinic sat at the end of Maple Road, with white walls and a faded sign that read, "Hope Animal Clinic." Inside, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the sound of rain on the porch. She laid out an old wool blanket and placed the dog on a metal table. When the light came on, I saw him clearly. Patchy skin, hollow belly, front legs trembling so badly he could barely stand. Grace got to work. Cleaning wounds, applying ointment, drawing blood. She muttered under her breath as she worked severe dehydration. Anemia. Slight jaundice, liver's weak. No chip, no name. I looked at him and asked, "So, what do we call him now?" Grace looked up. "You name him. He deserves that much." I stayed quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain tapped steadily like the tired rhythm of a worn-out heart. I looked at him again, those eyes still open, still guarding the world, yet holding a faint glimmer of hope. "Echo," I said, because he survived on nothing but the echo of his own heartbeat. Grace smiled faintly. "Echo. That's a beautiful name." That night I stayed at the clinic. Grace let me keep watch while she went to rest. I sat on a wooden chair, eyes fixed on the small creature wrapped in a blanket, breathing weakly but evenly. Every so often he shivered, reflexes from nightmares he hadn't yet escaped. I couldn't sleep. I just listened to the rain, to the drip of the IV, to my own breath, like someone guarding a fragile soul. Near midnight, Echo opened his eyes. I thought he wanted water, but no. He simply lifted his head and rested his chin gently on the toe of my boot. The movement was slow, weak, almost unconscious, but it broke me. A creature abandoned, beaten, branded as disease still dared to trust a stranger. I reached out, stroked his head. Hair came off in wet strands, fragile and thin, but I didn't pull away. "It's okay," I said, voice cracking. You're safe now." He closed his eyes and exhaled like someone finally allowing himself to rest after too many days of fighting. I sat there watching him sleep, and I understood. In a world so loud, so quick to label and discard whatever it doesn't want to see, there are still lives that need only a hand, a name, and a quiet promise. You won't be called diseased anymore, Echo. You'll live. Fan 3. The next morning, the sky hung gray and heavy like cold ash. I sat on the wooden chair by the clinic window watching Echo sleep curled up in the thin blanket Grace had left drying overnight. Light filtered through the frosted glass and fell across his coat patches of brown and black mixing with pink scars, like the map of a world that had once been burned down. Grace came out of the mixing room holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Has he eaten yet?" she asked. "A little," I said, "shredded chicken and rice broth. He eats slowly, but he wants to live." She nodded softly, then sat beside me. When I was in Iraq, she said we once saved a military dog. Shrapnel all over its body. But what kept it alive wasn't the medicine, it was the fact that someone called its name. She turned to me. And now Echo has someone calling his name too. I didn't answer. I just watched Echo stir, slightly exhaling as if he could hear us. But peace never lasts long in Millfield. Around noon, a dark red pickup screeched to a stop outside brakes, screaming across the lot. The door slammed open, and there he was, Baxter. Beer can still in hand, followed by a uniformed animal control officer. "Where is he?" Baxter barked. Grace stepped out calmly. "If you're here to make threats, come back when you're sober." Baxter jabbed a finger toward me. You took my dog. I raised him. I've got witnesses." I stood up straight, voice low. "Witnesses. What, your trash cans?" The officer stepped between us. "All right, everyone. Calm down. I just need to know. Does this dog belong to Mr. Baxter or not?" Grace held up the test results, injury photos, and medical notes. Neck lacerations from prolonged restraint. Infection, starvation, chemical burns around the muzzle. If that's what he calls raising, I'd love to hear his definition of compassion. The officer flipped through the papers, shrugged. "I'll need time to review. Can't make a call yet." Baxter sneered. "See? Should have kept your nose out of it, Walter. Some things aren't meant to live." His words hit like a punch. But before I could speak, Grace's voice cut through the room, sharp, cold, absolute. "No one dies here unless I say so, and you Baxter get out before I call the police for animal cruelty." Baxter scoffed, turning away. "You think anyone's gonna believe you? In this town, they want proof, not tears." The car door slammed. The smell of diesel lingered in the air along with the anger burning in my throat. Evening fell. The sky darkened and rain began again. Grace called me to the porch, pointing to the old clinic sign. Something was stuck to the wooden frame, a piece of paper soaked and smeared with ink, but still readable. "Drop the dog, or you're next." I said nothing. She tore the note down, threw it into the trash, and said quietly, "In this town, sin isn't something people want to destroy. It's something they've learned to live with." "Are you scared?" I asked. Grace looked out at the rain, now falling harder. "Of course," she said. "But fear doesn't mean silence." That night we took turns watching over Echo. He was weak, but every time I laid my hand on him I could feel the warmth of life returning. Each breath was a protest against what people had done to him. Near midnight, Echo stirred, eyes opening in the dark. He looked around then at me. I'll never forget that look, no longer pure fear, but a thin, trembling thread of trust. I leaned close and whispered, "Sleep, Echo. We haven't won yet, but you're not alone anymore." He pressed his head into my palm and gave a faint whimper. And just then outside I heard it, the distant blare of a truck horn echoing from the market district. Grace met my eyes, worry glinting in hers. Baxter's not done. I nodded, tightening my grip on her hand. Then neither are we. By morning, I cleaned up the clinic. On the table, a small steel bowl, a few fallen hairs, and a towel, still smelling faintly of antiseptic. Grace walked in, smiling weakly, voice hoarse from lack of sleep. He made it through the night. The fever's down. I exhaled the weight in my chest, finally easing. Good. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first sunlight spilled across Echo's damp face. For the first time, he closed his eyes and took a long, peaceful breath. And I knew, no matter how many silent walls we'd still have to face in this town, we now had living proof that kindness still breathed. There are walls made of bricks, I murmured, and there are walls made of silence. The second kind is always the hardest to break. Fan 4. That night, Millfield went dark. The whole town sank into a thick, breathless darkness broken only by the shaky beams of flashlights from a few lonely houses, thin streaks of light trembling against the walls like frightened hands. I was tidying the clinic when Grace came out the IV tube for Echo in her hand. "Power's out across the block," she said. "Heater's down. We need to keep him warm." I started a small fire in the corner stove, wrapping thick blankets around the cage. Echo lay there, wheezing, his body temperature dropping fast. I pressed my hand to his chest. The heart was still beating, but weak like a tiny drum in a raging storm. Outside, wind whistled through the door cracks. The first winter rain began to fall. I pulled the curtain back and saw headlights cutting through the downpour, a red pickup idling at the gate. My heart sank. Grace heard it too. She turned, voice low. "Baxter." The clinic door burst open. Baxter stood there, soaked to the bone, eyes bloodshot with beer and hate. In his hand, a long iron rod, caked with mud at the tip. "You think you're better than me, Grace?" he spat. "Think that half-dead mutt's worth more than a man in this town." Grace stood between him and Echo, her voice calm, almost deadly quiet. "Leave Baxter. Before you do something you can't take back." He gave a dry, bitter laugh. "You always play the savior. But what's the point of saving it? It's not going to make it. And when it dies, you'll see I was right." I stepped forward, standing between them. "That's enough, Baxter. Put the rod down." But he didn't. He took another step, raised it high, and then thunder cracked. A flash of lightning lit up the window, bright as day. Startled, Baxter dropped the rod. It hit the floor with a sharp metallic clang that seemed to shake the air itself. In that same instant, Echo jolted, then whimpered. Just one sound. But it froze the whole room. His eyes opened, clouded, but alive. Grace dropped to her knees. "Walter, hold him. I need to inject adrenaline." I held Echo tight, feeling his frail body tremble violently in my hands, fighting death itself. The air filled with the scent of antiseptic rust and rain-soaked mud. Grace drove the needle in, whispering, "Come on, Echo. Hold on." Baxter stood motionless in the doorway, staring at the shaking dog. In the flickering light, he looked less like a man and more like the ghost of one, a hollow shell of rage and emptiness. Then he turned, stumbling out into the storm. The door slammed so hard the frame rattled. Only the rain and Echo's ragged breathing remained. I saw blood trickling from his mouth, a thin dark line. Grace wiped it gently, her voice trembling but firm. "Septic reaction. I need the special antibiotics, but the cold storage is down." She looked at me, eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. "Walter, I'm not letting him die." I looked down at Echo, his gaze faint, unfocused, yet somehow still reaching for me. Then slowly he licked my hand. A motion so weak it barely existed, but it said everything. "I want to live." I squeezed his paw gently. "Listen, Echo. You've come too far. You don't get to give up now, you hear me?" Grace hurried to the cabinet for a backup IV line. I sat there listening to the wall clock tick each second like a blade against my nerves. Then, suddenly, the emergency lights flickered on. The heater hummed back to life. Grace exhaled in relief. Power's back. We worked in silence after that. 1 hour, then 2. By dawn, Echo had stopped trembling. His breathing was steadier, quieter. Morning light pushed through the fogged window spreading across the blanket where he lay. I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes, Grace was standing beside me, smiling, eyes glistening. He made it Walter. I looked down. Echo was still asleep, chest rising and falling. No more rasping sound, just calm breath. And as I leaned closer, I heard it a tiny bark. Not loud, not strong, but it was the sound of a soul reclaiming its right to live. I laughed, tears spilling down my face before I could stop them. Grace sat beside me and whispered, "Sometimes the strongest thing in the world comes from the weakest body." Outside the Millfield market was still and dripping after the storm, but something inside me had changed forever. I knew that from the moment Echo drew breath again, neither of us would ever be the same. That night, no one heard him bark, but it was the silence that saved a life. Fan 5. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the clinic window, soft as a hand resting gently on my shoulder. Echo was still wrapped in the wool blanket, but his breathing had steadied. With every inhale, his small chest lifted fragile, yet defiant, like a blade of grass pushing through stone. Grace was writing down the test results when I walked over. She said quietly, "Unbelievable. The fever's gone heart stable. If he makes it through the next 24 hours, he'll live." I looked at her, a tired smile flickering across my face. He's already living, Grace. His body's just trying to catch up to his spirit. Echo stirred at the sound of our voices opening his eyes. When I leaned closer, he tried to lift his head, then placed one paw gently on my hand. For the first time, not out of fear, but connection. But Millfield never lets goodness breathe for long. Around noon, a black SUV stopped outside the clinic. 2 officers stepped in, faces blank, voices dry. "We received a complaint," one said. "There's an allegation that Mr. Jameson and Dr. T. Mitchell are harboring an animal illegally." My hands tightened. "From who, Mr. Baxter?" the other replied. Grace handed them the files, injury photos, test results, and the "Do Not Touch" sign sealed in a plastic bag. She said firmly, "If you're going to arrest someone, arrest the man who tortured this creature." One of the officers looked at Echo and froze. "Dear God, that's a puppy." I nodded. 3 months old, and he's alive despite this whole town trying to erase him. They were silent for a few seconds. Then one muttered, "We'll file a report, but Baxter has connections. You two should be careful." The door closed behind them. The sound of the engine faded, leaving a heavy emptiness pressing on my chest. Grace leaned against the wall, eyes closed. "He won't stop," I answered softly. "Then, neither will we." That afternoon, I mopped the wooden floor of the clinic, hands trembling from exhaustion. Echo lay near the heater, his head resting on an old towel. I turned away for just a moment, then heard a faint tap. Tap. When I looked back, he was standing. His legs shook, bending twice before he steadied himself again. Each step was slow, uncertain, like a child learning to walk. Grace turned around, almost holding her breath. Oh my God. He took 3 steps, then stumbled, falling to his side. But his tail was wagging. The room fell completely silent except for the soft creak of the floorboards under his paws. One sound, then another. And then he stood again. This time he walked toward me, head low, eyes glowing like embers rekindled after a long, cold night. I knelt, my throat tightening. That's it, Echo. Just like that. One step at a time. Grace whispered beside me. He's not just surviving Walter. He's learning to trust people again. I stroked his head, feeling warmth beneath my palm, real, steady warmth. Outside, the gray clouds began to break apart. A beam of sunlight slipped through the window and touched his patchy fur. And I swear, in that light, Echo didn't look fragile anymore. He looked like proof that compassion still had a pulse in this town. That evening, as I was leaving, Grace stood by the doorway and said softly, "Tomorrow, we'll publish the case file. If Millfield refuses to see, we'll make them look." I nodded, my eyes drifting back to Echo asleep again, chest rising and falling in rhythm. On the walk home, I saw Baxter at the bar. His stare followed me through the window like a shadow. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd heard that little bark. And when a fragile creature can stand up in the middle of the night, nothing in this world can make me fall again. Sometimes I thought the smallest steps make the loudest sound of life. Fan 6. 3 days later, Millfield was no longer silent. Grace had done what I once believed no one here would ever dare to do. She brought the truth into the light. She posted Echo's photo online along with his medical records, the Do Not Touch sign, and a short caption, "A soul labeled as trash," but still chose to believe in humans. Within hours, the post spread everywhere. People who had once walked past Echo without stopping now wrote public apologies. Folks from neighboring towns sent blankets, food, and medicine. A nearby school even held a fundraiser, hanging Echo's picture on their bulletin board with the words, "He survived because someone stayed." But not everyone wanted to face the truth. That afternoon, a rock crashed through the clinic window carrying a note that read, "You're disgracing Millfield." Grace picked it up. Her eyes didn't shake, but her voice did. "I knew there'd be backlash," she whispered, "but I didn't think it would come this fast." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let them talk. When truth makes people uncomfortable, it means it's finally doing its job." That night, we sat in the quiet clinic listening to the soft rain tapping on the tin roof. Echo slept near the heater, his legs twitching now and then, lost in some gentle dream. I looked at him and said softly, "You know, Grace, when I worked at the factory, I saw people throw away perfectly good things just because they had a dent or a scratch. I realize now we do the same thing to living beings." She gave a weary smile. "And you pick up what they throw away." "I'm not that good at it," I said, but Echo reminded me sometimes it only takes one person who doesn't turn away. The next morning, a local TV van pulled up in front of the clinic. A reporter asked Grace, "Why did you do this knowing the whole town might turn against you?" Grace looked straight into the camera, her eyes unwavering. "Because silence has killed more living souls than disease ever did. And if a small town can't protect one puppy, then it doesn't deserve to call itself a community." Her words spread like wildfire. That night, Hope Animal Clinic was flooded with flowers, thank you letters, and prayers. But at the same time, Baxter vanished from town. Grace's face tightened with worry. "He won't let this go, Walter. I can feel it. This isn't over." I nodded, staring out the window. Outside, the streetlight poured over Echo's shadow. He lifted his head, eyes clear as the water staring into the darkness, and in that moment I felt he understood everything. That sometimes to save one life you have to wake an entire town that's fallen asleep in fear. When the truth finally speaks, I thought people might hate it, might fear it, but they can never pretend they didn't hear it again. Fan 7. That night, the wind in Millfield felt strange. Not cold, but charged, like it was warning that something was about to happen. I was locking the clinic door when headlights swept across the wall. A red pickup, mud-caked old, rolled to a stop outside the gate. Baxter stepped out. His face twisted in the glow of the lights. In his hand, a gas can. "He's lost his mind," Grace whispered. Before I could react, he hurled the can against the wall and struck a match. The flame caught instantly, racing upward, as if the whole town had been waiting to burn. Glass shattered. The sharp smell of smoke mixed with disinfectant. Grace lunged for Echo still inside his crate. I grabbed the fire hose, spraying wildly, but the blaze devoured air like a starving beast. "Save him! Walter," she shouted through the smoke. I charged through the fire. Heat tore through my sleeves, smoke clawed my throat. Echo barked, his second bark stronger this time, slicing through the chaos like a vow to survive. I kicked the steel frame open and lifted him into my arms. As we ran for the door, a beam cracked loose above us. Grace shoved me aside. The beam crashed down on her shoulder. I dragged her out, through the haze, coughing, choking. Outside, Echo trembled in my arms. Grace collapsed on the curb. Behind us, Hope Animal Clinic was engulfed in flames. Baxter stood there, the fire dancing in his eyes, his grin made of ash. Then came the sirens howling through the night. Police cars screeched to a stop. Baxter was handcuffed and dragged away. I knelt beside Grace. She gripped my hand, breathing in short, broken gasps. "As long as he lives," she whispered. "I'm fine." Echo nestled into her lap, resting his head on her burned arm. No barking now, just breathing 3 lives clinging to a nameless miracle. By morning, Millfield woke up. People gathered in front of the ruins. Online, a photo of the burned clinic spread with a single caption someone had written. They tried to burn compassion. It burned brighter. Students came and laid flowers. Those who had once stayed silent built a new sign with their own hands. "Hope still lives here." Grace lay in the hospital, her shoulder bandage, smiling faintly when she saw me carry Echo in. His burned patches had healed into soft pink skin, his eyes bright again, fearless. She whispered, "Walter, do you see it? Millfield's awake now." I nodded, because one small dog reminded them what it means to be human. 2 months later, a young couple from Oregon came to adopt Echo, husband-wife, and a little girl. I stood outside, heart heavy but warm, watching them drive away. Through the window, Echo looked back, those same clear eyes I'd seen the first day, only now without fear. Grace stood beside me, her voice soft. "You know he'll never forget." I smiled. "Neither will I." That night, I returned to what was once the clinic. In the blackened soil, only a fragment of the old sign remained, the word "Hope," half burned, but still visible. I brushed off the ash and propped it against a wooden beam. Some say kindness dies in this world, but if a little dog once left for dead in the trash can learned to trust humanity again, then maybe kindness was never truly gone. My name is Walter Jameson, and I believe that sometimes, to save a small life, God sends just one person, not to change the world, but to remind the world that light still exists. There are small souls that don't need words, only a single look to say,